Welcome back everyone, this is part 14 of the Ultimate Unsolved Mysteries Iceberg created by Jimbo Seth. I will link all of the previous parts in a playlist in the description if you are new to the series, but just keep in mind some of the entries might be a bit graphic, so viewers' discretion is advised. But before we start, if you guys follow me on my socials, you'll know I recently picked up a baby fur demon and he has turned my life upside down. However, today's sponsor, Factor, has tremendously helped in relieving some stress from my daily life. With my daily schedule now revolving around taking care of my pup, I have become extremely busy and struggle to eat healthy consistently. Factor allows me to skip the grocery shopping, the prep work, the cleaning, all on top of providing quality nutritional meals. Factor meals are always fresh and never frozen, and you can have your meals ready in just a couple of minutes. But sometimes I like to toss the meals into a pan or something if I have a little extra time, which makes them even more delicious. Choose from over 34 chef-prepared, dietitian-approved options weekly that not only taste amazing, but will promote a healthy lifestyle. One of my favorite dishes from Factor is the herb-crusted chicken with mashed cauliflower and toasted almond green beans. Factor and I have partnered to provide you with 50% off of your first Factor box when you visit factor75.com and use my code DLAM50 at checkout. Factor also offers a wide array of over 45 add-ons including breakfast items and fruit smoothies. So again, head to factor75.com or use the link in the description and use my code DLAM50 to get 50% off of your first Factor box. Thank you to Factor for sponsoring the video. On June 16, 1991 in Denver, Colorado, there was an event at the United Bank Tower, which is now the Wells Fargo Center, that resulted in the deaths of 4 people. The robber made it out with an estimated amount of $200,000 US, and the culprit has yet to be caught after over 3 decades. However, police did arrest one man about 3 weeks later for the robbery, which we will discuss in detail later on. So on Sunday, June 16th, around 9 a.m., the United Bank Tower's vice president, Robert Bardwell, paid the building a visit and requested entry from a guard through a side entrance. The guard that answered Robert's call was named William McCollum Jr. William kindly replied that he'd be right there and took the elevator up to the entrance from the guard room. Once the elevator reached the entrance, William put on a smile and got ready to greet the tower's vice president. But as the elevator doors opened up, it wasn't Robert that was waiting there. Instead, it was a man that he had never seen before in his 50s to 60s with a gun in hand. The unknown man pointed the gun to William's skull and demanded to be brought to the sub-basement area of the bank. When the 2 men got to the destination, William was shot dead. The gunman hid William's body in a storage room before taking his pass card. He continued through the basement and made his way to the guard station, where he proceeded to gun down 2 more unarmed guards. Not long after, another unarmed guard stepped inside of the guard station and was subsequently shot and killed. These men were named Philip Mankoff, Scott McCarthy, and Todd Wilson. Investigators later stated that a total of 18 shots were fired, 17 of which hit his victims. And just an FYI, that first guard that met the robber in the elevator was also unarmed. The intruder then proceeded to wipe the security cameras and remove as many videotapes as he could to eliminate any possibility of identifying him. It's believed that he seized at least 10 tapes, several bank cards, a 2-way radio, as well as several pages of the guard logbook. A little over 30 minutes after entering the building, the robber finally opened up the vault, but not before holding up the 6 tellers that were on duty. The intruder forced the tellers to cover their eyes and lie down on the floor, and then proceeded to command the manager, David Barranco, to fill up a bag with $200,000, which was strange for a reason we'll talk about towards the end. And for some reason, he decided not to kill or even harm these 6 employees, but he did shove them into a small room referred to as a man trap before leaving the premises. Based on electronic records, it took about 7 and 10 minutes to obtain the cash. When authorities finally arrived, the witnesses said the man was wearing a gray sport coat, a white shirt, a multicolored necktie, bluish gray slacks, a brown fedora, mirrored sunglasses, as well as a bandage on his left cheek. And again, the guy was either in his 50s or 60s. After police swept the building entirely, there really wasn't any evidence left behind that was useful. In fact, the only significant items were those 18 bullets that were used to kill the guards. Over 4 dozen FBI agents and an additional 2 dozen detectives were brought in to figure out the identity of the culprit and arrest him. One of the very first things that shocked the investigators was the amount of money that the robber stole. Remember how I said it was strange that he took $200,000? Well, that's because there was well over $2 million in cash available. And just in case you're thinking the reason for this was because he couldn't carry it all, that may be somewhat true. However, the satchel that was used to carry the $200K wasn't even close to being filled up. Authorities also couldn't seem to understand why the intruder decided to spare the tellers while murdering the guards. Keep in mind, those guards were unarmed, so it's not like they posed more of a threat than the other employees. When the investigators went through the electronic records, they determined it took no more than an hour for the robber to get in and get out. They also discovered that around 4 a.m. the same day, an alarm went off in the basement but had been turned off. And as far as I know, I don't think investigators ever stated that this was relevant to the robbery, but nevertheless, it is an interesting detail. Police quickly ruled out the actual vice president, Robert Bardwell, as the culprit since he was on vacation with his family at the time. But they were confident that the culprit had some sort of tie with the bank itself. If not that, they thought it was also possible that the robber was an active or retired police officer since he fired 18 rounds and 18 was a standard load carried by officers. Once investigators gathered all the information they could from the witnesses and the crime scene, they narrowed the search down to a retired Denver police officer named James King. James also worked for the bank as a security guard for about a year after he retired in 1986. He did leave this bank job about 10 months before the robbery, and one of the key motivators that police like to bring up is the mountain of debt that James had accrued. He and his wife declared bankruptcy not long after James retired from his police work. James was able to somewhat chip away at his debt, but unfortunately, he still owed tens of thousands of dollars by 1991. In fact, his credit card bills alone were well over $25,000. Authorities arrested James on July 4th, 1991 and swept through his home, but with the stuff that they found, they couldn't without a doubt tie James to the robbery. So inside, authorities discovered an extremely detailed map of the building inside of a folder labeled as plans. They also found 5 fake ID cards with different aliases that James went by. Pretty much all this quote-unquote evidence was dismissed by a judge since they weren't actually used in any illegal activity and thus not included in James's trial. Now, James did do some strange things before and after the date of the robbery. He was not known for shaving his facial hair, but he did so after the date of the crime, saying that his lip started to hurt. James also purchased a large deposit box before the robbery, which for obvious reasons made a lot of people suspicious. Additionally, police had James dress up in attire matching the culprit, and he lined up with several other suspects, and James was picked out to look most like the robber by 5 of the 6 bank tellers. As for the $200K, authorities never found any trace of it on James. Ultimately, James was acquitted, but police did pay close attention to him through the following years, and many prosecutors involved in the trial were confident that James was guilty. And James was pretty much the most viable suspect. And there was one theory that I came across that I found pretty interesting, and it suggested that the main goal of the robbery wasn't even to obtain money, but instead it was a job to take out one or several of the security guards. But this is a pretty baseless theory, there isn't any evidence, I just found it pretty interesting, and it would explain why so little money relative to what was available was taken. The money was only meant to serve as a sort of smokescreen to the murders. The television Ghost refers to a show that was broadcasted on W2XAB in New York City during the early 1930s and is now considered lost media. The premise of the show revolved around various ghosts talking about their lives leading up to their deaths. Each episode swapped to a new ghost, however, the ghost was always played by the same actor, George Kelting. And while this was a TV program, the television Ghost more so resembled a radio show, as most of the episodes showed off a continuous shot of George's head as he spoke. The show concluded in 1933 after running for 2 years, which was likely a result of the station's suspended operations due to the Great Depression. And due to the technological limits of the time, the series was shown live and nobody was able to record it, including the network themselves. According to some people who actually saw the show, it was way too dim and basically unwatchable as you couldn't make anything out. The only existing elements of the show today are some photos and newspaper clippings that mention it. On January 13th, 1996, 9-year-old Amber Hagerman was riding her bike alongside her 5-year-old brother Ricky in the parking lot of a long shut-down Winn-Dixie grocery store in Arlington, Texas. It was about 3 p.m. when Ricky got over the allure of the abandoned grocery store and decided to head back to their grandparents' house. Once Ricky got home, he locked up his bike and stepped inside, and his grandpa looked up to see that Amber wasn't with him. He asked her where she was, and Ricky told him that she was still riding around the abandoned Winn-Dixie parking lot. The grandfather was displeased that Ricky had left his sister all alone and decided to bring Ricky along with him as they went to check on Amber. But as they neared the building, they were greeted with the jarring sight of police cars flashing their lights and numerous officers investigating the premises. The grandfather's heart sunk when he saw Amber's pink bicycle lying on the ground. He ran to the officers asking what had happened, and it turned out that shortly after Ricky had left, a man pulled up to Amber in a black truck and abducted her. The police were notified by a 78-year-old man named James Kevill, who has since passed away, that lived in a house that perfectly overlooked the parking lot. Jim told police he felt that it was unsafe that the two children were riding their bikes in such an area, so when he noticed that one of them left, he decided to keep an eye on the girl. And that was when the black pickup truck sped up to Amber, ripped open its doors, and yanked her inside before tearing down the road. Jim wasn't able to make out fine details on the man, but he said he was either white or Hispanic with brown hair. A massive search followed, and the city of Arlington prayed that the girl was found before anything bad could happen. And it wouldn't take long before police got a tip. On January 17th, just 4 days after Amber's abduction, a man took his dog out for his daily walk near the Forest Hills apartment complex, and at first the stroll seemed like any other. But as they approached the creek bed, the dog froze up and became extremely agitated. The dog began to bark aggressively, which led the man to investigate the creek. He leaped away in shock and fear when he discovered the naked and lifeless body of the girl he just saw on the news. Immediately, he contacted police, and when they arrived, they did confirm that the body was Amber Hagerman. This creek was about 4 miles away from the grocery store where Amber was kidnapped. The grandparents couldn't help but feel immense guilt as they thought they should have watched the kids the entire time. They told Amber and Ricky to only ride their bikes around the block and jokingly said that if they wandered out too far, bad people would attack them, not knowing that this imagery was ready to come to life. Once police and medical officials completed their examination of Amber's body, they determined that she had been alive for at least 2 days after her abduction. Around her neck, there were several severe lacerations, and there were clear signs that she had been SA'd. While the police and Amber's family were beyond devastated that Amber couldn't be saved, they wanted to at least see to it that the monster got what he deserved. And police thought to themselves that someone had to have seen something in the days leading up to the discovery of Amber's body, but no matter how many leads were brought to the police's attention, they couldn't get a viable suspect. Jim Kevill, the man who called 911 at the grocery store, later told police that if he had to guess, the abductor was either in his 20s or early 30s. Furthermore, he had a medium build and was less than 6 feet tall. Right next to the Winn-Dixie grocery store was a laundromat that police believed had witnesses, but no one ever came forward. It was rumored that many of the employees there were actually illegal immigrants, and police suspected that they feared coming forward would lead to their deportation. Arlington Police Sergeant Grant Gilden mentioned that he believed the culprit was a local and is adamant someone in the city knows who they are. He had the following to say about the site where Amber was found. It's a very secluded area where her body was found. We do believe you'd have to be somewhat familiar with that area to know where that creek is. But as the decades passed, the case just gradually went cold. A woman in the community named Diane Simone, who was also a mother, learned about Amber's abduction on the news years after her death, and she really wished that she could help. Diane became increasingly frustrated as she wasn't sure what exactly to look for in the case, which prompted her to suggest the Amber Alert. And if you live in the US, you 100% know what that is, and some countries internationally even use it. But for my audience that has never heard of it before, it's basically an emergency notification that goes on your phone whenever a child is abducted with details about their last seen location or the vehicle that they were in. And oftentimes these notifications would also be displayed on highways. Diane called a Dallas-Fort Worth radio station with the idea saying, "We have weather and civil defense alerts, why not alerts for abducted children?" What started as an idea became a resource that went on to save over 8,000 children's lives at the time of recording. So while Amber was tragically murdered, she has in turn also kicked off this alert that will only continue to save more lives. And in just the last half year or so, many of the cases that we have gone over in this Iceberg have come to be solved. So who knows, maybe sometime in the near future, Amber will finally get the justice she deserves. Back in early March of 2022, what is known as the Seishoseki, or Killing Stone, completely split in half in the Nikko National Park, which is located about 100 miles north of Tokyo. It's presumed that what caused the stone to crack was water seeping inside, freezing, and then expanding through the winter. But what makes this stone so notable for many is the cryptic tale that it comes with. About 1,000 years ago, the stone was said to entrap a beautiful woman named Tamamo no Me. While she appeared beautiful on the surface, Tamamo was actually an evil nine-tailed fox spirit, and the splitting of the stone marked her resurrection. Reason she was trapped inside was because she had formed a secret plan to kill Emperor Toba, who ruled from 1107 to 1123. The tale varies depending on the source, but some say that she was stopped in the act, while others say that she succeeded in poisoning the emperor. When she was found out by a court astrologer, she fled into the forest in her fox form. However, she failed to escape as samurai were sent to capture her. One of the samurai wounded Tamamo, causing her to take the form of a stone. Legend says if you simply touch the stone, you will die, while others state that because she was captured and trapped inside, she was emitting toxic gas. And the reason this gas rumor came about is because around the area there would be several animals or creatures found dead, but this has a pretty mundane explanation. You see, the stone was in a unique location near multiple volcanoes. These volcanoes were the source of gases that occasionally contributed to the deaths of several animals and humans over the years. While some believe the cracking of the stone to be a bad omen, others thought it to be a rather good one, thinking that the previously evil spirit was freed in order to do good for the world. JFK's death is one of those super high-profile events that is rampant with conspiracy theories to this day. Many people don't believe that Lee Harvey Oswald was the only man involved, and instead there were two, if not more, people responsible for the assassination. The badge man refers to an apparent figure that can be observed in a photograph taken during JFK's assassination. There are many conspiracy theorists that believe this figure played a role in JFK's death. These theorists think that he may have fired off a weapon from a distance behind a wall. The person's appearance is heavily skewed as a sort of muzzle flash can be seen blocking out most of the face. But people seem to agree that the guy is wearing some sort of police uniform, and on his chest area you can see what appears to be a badge, earning the person the name Badgeman. The photo was taken by one Mary Mormon a fraction of a second after JFK was struck. Mary took many photos that day, but this remains the most famous of the bunch. When the first shot rang out, many people made their way to the grassy knoll, thinking that the assassin was in that area, but no one was ever found. There was a brief investigation into a figure that would fit the description of the badge man, but it's not like there was much of a description in the first place. Some theorists attempted to tie the badge man to another man named Gordon Arnold, who was a soldier that claimed to be on the grassy knoll the day of the incident with a movie camera. Gordon claimed that an officer demanded that he hand over the camera, and this officer was probably the same one in the photo. However, when examining all of the photographs available of this scene, investigators couldn't find Gordon anywhere in those photos, which to some was conclusive proof that Gordon had made up the story about a uniformed figure firing off shots, and he was never actually there. Another theory suggests that the badge man was actually J.D. Tippit. Tippit was a World War II veteran and an officer with the Dallas Police Department. About an hour after JFK was hit, Tippit was fatally wounded by a gunshot from Oswald when he was in the Oak Cliff section of Dallas, but there was never any evidence to support this idea. So, while there are many people that believe the badge man was an assassin who got away, there are equally as many people that think this part of the photograph is nothing more than a sort of illusion. Since the idea of there being multiple gunmen is so rampant, our brains instantly create these false figures and photographs to try and justify the idea. But who knows, maybe the badge man really is still out there. It was December 26, 1900 when a crew made its way to the Flannan Islands, which is just a bunch of smaller islands off the coast of Scotland. The destination was the Eilean Mor Island, which was completely uninhabited aside from the keepers inside of the lighthouse and the occasional shepherd that brought along their sheep to graze around the island. But the shepherds were careful to never stay the night due to a legend about malevolent spirits roaming the location. Every now and then there would be a visitor and they too would note the eerie atmosphere of the place. The crew was to provide fresh resources, including food and water, as well as replace one of the 3 keepers. The captain of the ship was named James Harvey, and he brought along a man named Joseph Moore, who was the replacement lighthouse keeper. As they neared the island, nobody was in sight, and there were several telltale signs that something bad had happened. The keepers knew that they were supposed to be visited soon, yet their dock was totally unkempt, and the lighthouse itself looked to be abandoned. The captain was expected to meet one of the keepers there, but nobody came out. James was completely shocked at this and blew his horn, thinking that maybe the keepers just had their schedules mixed up, but still nobody greeted them. Joseph decided that it would be best to actually go to the lighthouse to check on the keepers. So he rowed ashore and made his way up the stairs to the lighthouse. And in later accounts, Joseph said he felt an immense feeling of dread as he trudged his way up those stairs. When he got to the lighthouse, his suspicions were pretty much confirmed. The door to the lighthouse was left ajar, and inside there was one remaining oilskin coat, half-eaten food left on the table, and a chair that was left on its side almost as if someone had jumped out of it in an emergency. As Joseph rushed through the lighthouse, he still couldn't find anyone. When he reached the bedrooms of the keepers, all of their beds were unkempt with their pillows and blankets strewn all about. Exiting the lighthouse with only the feelings of confusion and frustration, Joseph informed James of what he saw, and James immediately sent out a telegram to the mainland that said the following. A dreadful accident has happened at Flannan's. The 3 keepers, Ducat, Marshall, and the Occasional, have disappeared from the island. On our arrival there this afternoon, no sign of life was to be seen on the island. Fired a rocket, but no response was made. Managed to land Moore, who went up to the station, but found no keepers there. The clocks were stopped, and other signs indicated that the accident must have happened about a week ago. Poor fellow, they must have been blown over the cliffs or drowned trying to secure a crane or something like that. Night coming on, we could not wait to make something as to their fate. I have left Moore, McDonald, Buoymaster, and 2 seamen on the island to keep the light burning until you make other arrangements. Will not return to Oban until I hear from you. I have repeated this wire to Moorhead in case you are not home. I will remain at the telegraph office tonight until it closes. After receiving this message, a search ensued for the missing men, and a grand total of 0 of them were found. The man who hired those 3 keepers along with Joseph was named Robert Moorhead, and he decided to go down to Eilean Mor himself just to confirm what he was being told. And sure enough, the state of the lighthouse was just as Joseph and James had described. But it was around here when the men took note of the lighthouse logs, and we sort of shed some light on what happened to the men. So about 2 weeks prior, on December 12th, the second assistant, Thomas Marshall, wrote that there were severe winds that he had never seen in his 20+ years of working around the ocean. Thomas also noted that the principal keeper, James Ducat, and the third assistant, William MacArthur, were not acting like their normal selves. Ducat had abruptly gone quiet, and MacArthur suddenly began crying. And just in case you think MacArthur was just some coward and this was his first time facing the sea, that is not the case at all, and many of his peers described the man as a tough brawler type. The next day, on December 13th, the storm was wreaking havoc and all 3 of the men worried for their lives. Whenever they had the chance, they got to their knees and prayed that they get out of the storm alive. Robert found this incredibly strange as the lighthouse was 150 feet above sea level and was well equipped to withstand any sort of storm. The 3 men had essentially nothing to worry about, so just why were they so scared? And what made this even weirder was that there were no reported storms on the dates stated in the logs. So the final log was entered on December 15th, and it only said the following: storm ended, sea calm, God is over all. Just what exactly happened in that Eilean Mor Lighthouse leading up to December 15th? Well, when news of the event made its rounds, people from the mainland were perplexed as they stated that there were no storms in mid-December. In fact, the weather was pretty good. Those that were staying on the mainland were able to view all of the Flannan Islands and were adamant that there were no signs of a storm, let alone a full-blown one during that time. Robert Moorhead began to craft some theories and recalled that there were a lot of ropes tossed all over the rocks. These particular ropes were stored in a large brown crate on a supply crane that was 70 feet above where they were found. Robert thought that it was possible for the crate to come loose and fall down to that platform. The keepers then went down in an attempt to retrieve the ropes, but were met with a rogue wave that took them out to sea. But some people aren't exactly satisfied with this theory, and it doesn't really help to explain why there was still an oilskin coat left in the lighthouse in the midst of December. But the thing that really had people stumped was the fact that the weather was totally fine. Some people even think that the logbooks were fabricated. As the years went by, new keepers were swapped in and out of Eilean Mor, and funny thing was, each of these keepers reported hearing strange voices calling out the names of the 3 men who were presumed dead. Our next entry takes place on Santa Cruz Island off the coast of California. In a far corner of the island was a large ranch previously owned by Cary Stanton. In fact, he inherited the island from his parents before handing it down to various environmental agencies after his death in late 1987. And Cary will play a role in this entry later on, so just keep him in the back of your mind for now. So on April 27th of 1990, a staff member of the Agricultural Commissioner's Office named Joe Carl swept the ranch for old pesticides. On the ranch, there's this white and yellow 19th century wooden seed house that stored various supplies and tools meant for gardening. Joe stepped inside and dug around a bit before he noticed an out-of-place, tightly sealed copper box stowed away inside of a seed cabinet. He expected to just see something mundane, but what was inside completely stunned the man. When he undid the lid, he found cremated human remains as well as other items resting inside. Those items included metal nails, staples, screws, false teeth, a garment snap, and a ring that was believed to be a wedding band. Both the ring and the snap led investigators to speculate that the remains belonged to a woman, but they had absolutely no idea who. Nobody on the island knew about the copper box, so there really wasn't any information on who the person was. But investigators were able to discover a few key details about the items inside. The garment snap was determined to be manufactured in the 1940s, and both the ring as well as the false teeth were created before World War II. And as for all of the nails, staples, and screws, those are actually believed to have been part of a coffin. So before we go any further, I want to briefly revisit Cary. Cary lived a very precise and routine life, and during his time, he established a private cemetery. The staff of the cemetery informed investigators that copper boxes were often used to store cremated remains, but during World War II, they were discontinued due to a copper shortage. However, they did ultimately make a return later down the line. One particular staff member added that it is very normal for items such as screws and nails to withstand the heat used during cremation. There were some small bone fragments that were dug out of the remains, and after testing, officials believed that they likely belonged to an elderly woman. This conclusion was made in large part due to the arthritic changes in the bones and feminine characteristics in the wrist bone. Dr. Phil Walker, who was part of the investigation as a forensic anthropologist, stated that if he had to guess, the woman was likely cremated during the 1950s or 60s. Along with the task of figuring out the identity of the woman, authorities also needed to find out why she was being stored inside of that little shed. Was it possible that the former ranch owner, Cary, was hiding a dark secret? Well, according to those that knew him, it isn't likely. Authorities deemed that foul play was not involved, as the coffin parts indicated that the body was resting inside of a coffin during cremation. And just in case you're wondering, I'm pretty sure that bodies are removed from coffins or caskets before they are placed in the cremation chamber. Those coffins and caskets are replaced with a rigid material that can burn to contain the body. Otherwise, items such as those nails could survive the heat. However, it's not completely unheard of to just keep the body in the coffin while it's in the cremation chamber. So I guess this is just more so a variable that depends on the location and their practices. So to sum things up, the identity of the woman as well as the reason her remains were left inside that shed are still unknown, but we do know that she died after World War II in her 50s or possibly even later. She also had some arthritic condition in her wrist. It is widely believed that Carrie had nothing to do with the remains, but authorities did say this could change if they ever find out her identity. Some investigators think that the woman was the mother of a ranch worker who requested she had her remains scattered somewhere on the island, but for whatever reason, those tasked with the responsibility never got to it. And that is going to end part 14. Thank you all so much if you made it this far. One more thing I want to do is another version of this Iceberg that is also just unsolved mysteries, but full of entries from myself as well as you guys. Of course, these entries won't be on the Jimbo Seth Iceberg, or at the very least, I'm going to try and make sure they aren't. I'm not sure when I want to start this series. It might be at the end of this Iceberg, which still has a lot of entries on it. I don't want you to think I'm abandoning it or anything. It will probably take like 30 or so videos to cover the rest of this, but on the off chance that I want to start the series alongside this one, I'm not entirely sure what to call it, as I don't really want to organize it as an iceberg, since I will probably be getting entries for like an extended period of time. So like one entry that is more known might go into the top layer, while something more obscure should have gone at the very bottom, but I already covered it in like an earlier video, if that makes sense. So I sort of just want to go through everything at one time. But anyways, there may or may not be a Google Forms link in the description of the video at this time. If there is one, feel free to submit a mystery that you would like me to cover and just fill out the rest of the form, since I will be asking a couple of the questions on there. If there isn't a link in the description, just wait for it. I will try and add it in there when I get a chance. And don't worry, you don't need to keep coming back to this video to check for it. I will add it and mention it in future parts of this series, and I will be asking for sources or links, so try not to give me anything that is too obscure if you don't have a decent chunk of info on it. Additionally, if the mystery itself is something that YouTube probably doesn't like, I obviously won't be including it, but you can get a decent idea of what is allowed through these videos. It's mainly the super crazy conspiracy theories that may or may not go against guidelines. No matter how explicit a true crime case may be, I can typically always work around it and provide details in a way that is more tame. So just submit any sort of mystery that you would like me to cover. It doesn't have to be true crime. It can just be like any internet mystery that you want me to talk about. So finally, I want to give a special thank you to all of my channel members for supporting me. I say it every video, but I mean it. You all becoming members means so much to me. So thank you so much to Hero, Devoured Eagle, Fear the Milkman, Sasha Wise, Jerome Reuter, -5 stars, Fartbag69, Oscar Isaacson, Cam Haha, Melody, Bad Baphomet, and my name Matt. Thank you all so much. If any of you guys would like to become a member and get your name at the beginning and ends of the videos, as well as support me, you can check out the link in the description. And I keep saying it, but I will get to a consistent uploading schedule so I can get these out earlier for my members. Stay safe, everyone, and I hope you all have an amazing week.